Here's a project that I shot recently that doesn't look like absolute ass. Now, this was an interview that I did for Logitech and for a company called DTS. I set this whole thing up with a really small crew. I had a gaffer, a grip, and myself. Over the past several years, I have been tasked with shooting a lot of interviews. And every time I do it, it somehow makes me a better DP. And somewhere along the road, I think I've gotten pretty good at it. First thing I wanted to do here was scout the location. So the client owns this space and it's got these big circular windows in the background. And as cool as they look, I don't know, there's something about it that might feel a little bit dated to me. So I wanted to find a way to incorporate those circular backlights, but also kind of put my own twist on it. The first thing that I thought was, okay, we should probably shoot this not on the stage. We should shoot it on the ground, and maybe we should try anamorphic. So that's what we did. There are setups where you have to be small and nimble and you only have one light and it's a really tight space. And then there are setups like this where you have a massive room and you can do whatever you want. And that's kind of the beauty in it. I thought the best thing to do with a space like this is just to try a booklight. With a booklight, you're able to achieve multiple levels of diffusion. You're able to use a larger source, which in turn can make your images look softer. You're also able to control the light, so bringing in flags and floppies is no big deal. From the ASC's website, the primary job of a lighting diffusion filter is to break up direct hard rays of light from a source and scatter them to create a softer source. The softness of light is primarily determined by the size of the source relative to the source distance from the subject. While the sun is a huge light source, it's also roughly 93 million miles away from us on Earth. As a result of that distance, it's a very hard source of light that creates very sharp, well-defined shadows. When clouds cover the sky, they become the new apparent light source, and the size of the source increases from a small sphere to the entire visible sky itself. Bingo. So the bigger the booklight, the bigger the actual apparent source. In short, I wanted to use a booklight because I wanted to use a big, massive light source and get it as close to my subject as possible. In doing so, it makes my image perceived as more cinematic. Or honestly, as I like to say, it just has more production value. Now, plenty of big cinematographers use this technique. Even Roger Deakins uses a variation of the booklight. His is called the Cove light. So a booklight is a bounced light source. So you take a light source, you bounce it off of a material, and then you also put another material on the other side of the light, so that way the light passes through two levels of diffusion. So naturally I wanted to piss off my AC, so I made sure to bring the Blackmagic 6K and the Blackmagic 4K. I just really love the way that the Blackmagic cameras render color, and they're also the only cameras I own right now, so that's what we went with. We shot on the Atlas Orion anamorphic lenses, a 32mm and a 80mm. And just like every other DP on the internet, we used a Black Pro Mist 1.8 on both lenses for diffusion. To spice things up, we shot it in RAW on the 3.7K and I think 2.7K anamorphic modes on both the 6K and 4K. We had our A cam and our B cam at least 30 degrees away from each other, so that way our image didn't look jump cutty when we cut between the two cameras. I believe I set the temperature on my cameras to 5600 Kelvin. Now for more boring stuff. Now I believe I only brought with me 4 or 5 fixtures to set. 2 Nova P300Cs, one of which I own. We also brought a Aperture 300D, a 100X, and I believe another 300D. So I wanted to go for the biggest, softest diffusion I could go for. And luckily there is a fabric called full grid diffusion. There are plenty of different diffusion fabrics you can check out and different diffusion filters. There's also an article that I referred to by ASC Mag that kind of goes through the different diffusion and different stops that they take away and how soft they are. So I went for 2 layers of full grid, one for the bounce and one for the shoot through. Now with full grid, it pretty much eliminates all shape from your original light source and spreads it everywhere, which is exactly what we wanted for this look. The grid pattern on the diffusion also helps to focus the light a little bit more, which makes it easier to control. So how do we set this up? First, we put the two P300Cs up, and then about 4 to 6 feet in front of those lights, we hung the 8x diffusion silk, and that was bounced into another 8x diffusion silk on the other side, which you can see here. All we had to do to finish this off was use a 4x floppy, flop that sucker down, and just stop all the spill from happening in the background. This is called a cider. Make sure when you fly these floppy flags, you fly them with the soft side out. You also want to make sure that they're in front of the big leg of your C-stand and that they're in front of the metal pole, so that way you're not reflecting any light on your subject. You obviously want to put your floppy flags in front of your diffusion. If you put them behind, you're kind of gonna look like a dingus. After that, I just had to put up the hair light. My gaffer and I talked through it real quick. We decided we wanted to put a 300D up directly behind our subject. We used a aperture light dome softbox and a honeycomb grid on the front of that. We actually were able to mount the light onto the truss, so that way we didn't have to bring any more stands. There's plenty of tools to get the job done here, but we probably used a Matthews grid clamp. Since we were also using Nova P300Cs for our booklight, our source was just incredibly soft. A lot of the times people will go ahead and use open source fixtures. Sometimes they'll even use LECO sources, which is great as long as you have the right amount of diffusion to support your fixtures. Now keep in mind that when you do use diffusion material, you do lose some light, so make sure that you have lights that are powerful enough for what you're shooting. With the full grid cloth, we were losing 2.5 stops. There's 2 of those, so we lost 5 stops. The other lights in the background for hair light were playing pretty minimally. I think there's some sort of stage lighting parkans, but luckily there were LEDs and also bicolor, so there was a stage tech that kind of knew the whole setup in there. I could have him dial in the temperature to match my key light. With the mirror circle things in the background, he was also able to do the same thing, so I just showed him my reference and we were able to match it really well. Another cool thing about using diffusion is that your diffusion becomes your light source effectively, so you can shape it to your liking. For example, you could put a topper to cut light from hitting the ceiling or any other parts that you don't want it to be on. You can also use flags to cut the bottom to create a bottomer, so that way you're not spilling light onto undesirable places. And just because I'll go ahead and show you a few more shots from the shoot. So we had like 30 minutes to shoot some product while we were there, and we kind of just figured it out on the fly. Don't tell anyone that. Now I shot most of the product stuff on a Dana dolly. I had 2 Aperture Novas acting as 2 backlights that I could just kind of dial in the color palette for Logitech. They're mostly hanging around a blue temperature. Sometimes I did something a little bit different. And then I was using the 300D as my key light again. Then we just did some simple little lighting gags to spice it up a little bit. As I moved on the Dana dolly, we would just pan the 300D back and forth. We would do the same thing with the 2 hair lights. And we also were able to use the Aperture built-in effects such as strobe, flash, and all that good stuff. And it turned out pretty well. Hope this video helps you prepare for your next shoot. If you have any questions, please just leave them in the comments. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. If you could, please support the channel. I want to be doing a lot more of this stuff. You can go ahead and follow my IG with the link in the description. I'll see you again next time.